This is Chthonia, the world of the dark feminine. Hello, this is Breach Burke. Before we get into this week's podcast, I would like to thank my patrons personally. Gwyn K., Politi, Caitlin N., John H., Tanya T., Veronica S., Gabby, Helen M., Ruth S., Sunny H., Scott K., JRM, Susie G., Eldritch Priest, B. Lupita, C. Roberts, Jeanette, and DS. I really appreciate those of you who have joined recently and who have stuck with me over these years. Our community is small, and there's so much I would like to do in terms of providing courses, conversation on the dark feminine, and extra content, so please consider joining at patreon.com/Chthonia. Now on to the podcast. Hello and welcome to Chthonia, the podcast dealing with the dark feminine. I'm Breach Burke. And in this last podcast that we're doing for 2023, I'm going to cover a figure who is rather obscure and rather mysterious, but most certainly connected to winter. And I try to do winter figures around this time of year. And that is Despoina. Despoina is a Greek word for mistress, roughly, or mistress of the household, more specifically, according to the etymology. And this is a term that is applied to a variety of goddesses, including Persephone, Artemis, and Hecate. They're all considered to have this. They've all had this title of mistress, connected to mistress of the animals, perhaps. Similar epithets that are connected to them as well. That's the one that's the most common, and that's usually commonly associated with either Artemis or Hecate, who I have argued in the past. If you check out my past podcasts on both Artemis and Hecate, probably more on Artemis, I do actually mention the fact that that Hecate is really almost like an underworld version of Artemis. But among other things, I don't want not merely that, but there's definitely a strong connection between the two of them. Very likely that a role that Hecate had played was later taken on by Artemis. But Despoina is the Despoina that we're referring to is connected in particular to the Eleusian mysteries. Now, if you don't know what those are, the rites of Eleusis are connected to a mystery cult that was extraordinarily influential. I would say that the rites of Eleusis as a connection with the story of Demeter and Persephone, in which Persephone is abducted by Hades with the permission of Zeus, who is her. And actually, Zeus is actually her father, I think. There's Zeus and Demeter. Persephone is their daughter. And then Hades, who is Zeus's brother, falls in love. So Uncle Hades falls in love with Persephone, and he's given permission to take her to the underworld as his wife. And of course, this happens when Demeter has her back turned. So then when she finds her daughter is missing, she goes on this long journey to find her. And the story that involves Despoina is connected to this story. However, that said, also has connections to Arcadian religion. Now, the Arcadians are a group of people that are in Greece. I mean, they're literally an area of the Peloponnesian island there, where they're just to the south of what they think of as Achaia. And the inhabitants of Arcadia are connected with a group called the Pelasgians, who are considered to be the oldest indigenous habitants of that Greek area. The whole, and that whole sort of Mediterranean region and the areas that are identified as being part of Greece, which in the Iliad would have been considered to be part of what they were calling the Achaean League. In the Iliad, the troops that were on what we think of as the Greek side were referred to as Achaeans. So this particular people, the Arcadians, are definitely connected to the oldest people in the oldest inhabitants of what we think of now as Greece. And the two gods in particular that are associated with Arcadia have been Hermes, or Hermes, as some people like to say, and Pan. And when we think of something as being Arcadian, we think of it as being very pastoral, connected to the wilderness or to the wilds. And Despoina had a temple, and in a place called Lycosura. Okay, and of course the term Lycos, actually I believe the actual name means wolf's tail. But this is a place where we do actually have a temple of Despoina. And there's a lot of interesting history and story around that particular temple and around what is believed about this particular goddess. So what I want to do is I want to go first through who Despoina is supposed to be. And mind you, Despoina is what they call an epithet. It's a name, or it's a title, or epithets are usually in the form of, like for example in the Iliad, Zeus is often referred to as son of Kronos, for instance. Or ox-eyed Hera, or, there's like an epithet or a title. There's like a little phrase that goes with it. So Despoina is considered to be like a title or a phrase that goes with the name. We do not know the name of the goddess that Despoina refers to, but one of the things that, as I went down the rabbit hole of investigating this particular episode, I feel that we might be able to make some educated guesses, at least, as to who she might have been. Now, mind you, I'm going to say this with the caveat of I'm not putting myself forward in the scholarship to say, oh, this is who Despoina actually is, because the reality is I don't know. I don't know any more than anybody else does. Because the name of Despoina was a secret. You had to be an initiate of the Eleusian mysteries to learn that name. Now, the other name associated in the Eleusian mysteries was Kore. Okay, that was another title, Kore. Kore means young girl in Greek, and is generally a reference. In the Bible, that tends to be the word that's used for virgin, is the Kore, at least in the Greek versions. But Kore, basically any unmarried maiden is Kore, right? Before she becomes a gine, or becomes a married woman, or moves into that different stage of life. And of course, it is very openly said, just as it is in the Homeric hymn to Demeter, that Kore is a title that refers to Persephone. Okay, so when one talks about the Kore, they're talking about Persephone. Now, sometimes this title of just Despoina is sometimes sometimes attributed to Persephone, or sometimes attributed to Artemis or Hecate. They're attributed at times or conflated with Persephone, but there seems to be a definite difference between Persephone and this Despoina. And as we talk about the story, you'll see why this is. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about what the parentage is, where Despoina is supposed to come from, and then what her story is, and then look at Pausanias' writings in particular on her temple at Lycosura, and what that looked like, and what the symbolism was there. Because even though she's an obscure goddess, we don't know her real name, and there's not a whole lot in the way of story, you're going to find that there's actually it's jam packed with symbolism. The whole narrative of Despoina, even in that little piece that we have from Pausanias, and I feel almost like we have enough there to make some kind of a guess as to certainly what type of goddess Despoina is, and what her associations were, and who she might have been, even if we don't have the name. Okay, and truthfully, it may not even be a name that we know, but certainly we can know what her entitlements are, and probably what kind of a goddess she was. All right, so let's start with the story of who Despoina is. Okay, so I'm going to use theoi.com mainly, which is, I think, as I've mentioned in many podcasts, is a fantastic website for the basics about Greek mythology and Greek mythological figures. Theoi, Theoi, theoi.com, which is a free website. It does have some ads and stuff, and its search engine's a little weird because when you search for anything, you have to get past like the first three, which are usually advertising or featured, and then you get to the real search beneath that. But aside from that, Theoi has very, very authoritative descriptions of these different deities and figures in Greek mythology, and it's always followed by any genealogies that may be involved. And they also get into detail. They actually list translations from all the primary sources and from all the major mythic encyclopedias. They compile and aggregate all that information. So it's a really good website if you're trying to learn about Greek mythology. But I'm going to read the Wikipedia thing first, and then I will switch over to Theoi. Okay. Despoina was the epithet of a goddess worshipped by the Eleusian mysteries in ancient Greece as a daughter of Demeter and Poseidon and sister of Arion being a horse. Surviving sources refer to her exclusively under the title Despoina, the Mistress, a cognate of despot. alongside her mother Demeter, as her real name could not be revealed to anyone except those initiated into her mysteries and was consequently lost with the extinction of the Eleusian religion. Writing during the 2nd century AD, Pausanias spoke of Demeter as having 2 daughters, Kore being born first, before Despoina was born, with Zeus being the father of Kore and Poseidon as the father of Despoina. Pausanias made it clear that Kore is Persephone, although he did not reveal Despoina's proper name. In the myth, Poseidon saw Demeter and desired her. To avoid him, she took her archaic form of a mare, meaning a female horse. But he took the form of a stallion and mated with her. So she was trying to elude him by getting lost with other horses, but he turned himself into a stallion and managed to find her. From this union, Demeter bore a daughter, Despoina, and a fabulous horse, Arion. Due to her anger at this turn of events, Demeter was also given the epithet Erinyes, which means raging, but as we all know, the Erinyes is also the Greek name for the Furies. And so this is Demeter Erinyes, and I've talked about Demeter Erinyes again. Did a podcast a long time ago, a couple of years ago now, a few years ago, on Demeter, and we talk about Demeter Erinyes there, and that is Demeter in the form of a horse. And now the etymology that they mention here is Despoina is derived from the PIE root dem meaning house or household, the Sanskrit dhamma meaning house, and then domus, that's all of that. So the des has to do with, is related to domos or dem, so it's the household. And related words are despotes, master or lord, dominus, master of a household, etc. And the second element is from potnia, which is mistress, lady, or wife. As in, for example, potnia theron, which is the mistress of beasts, which we hear as an epithet of Hecate, and potentially of Artemis as well, at different junctures. I think Jake Stratton-Kent talks a little bit about this, or he did, in the last interview that I had done with him on Chthonia Conversations in, I want to say it was late March or early April of 2022. Before he became ill. I know we had certainly talked about the idea of the mistress of the beasts, potnia theron. So literally it means little mistress, or it has to do with mother of the house in some way. So those are sort of the different etymologies of that phrasing. Nonetheless, we definitely have the idea that this title is mistress, or there's she's the mistress of something. And the question is going to become of what. Okay, so let's look at Despoina, as they say in Theoi here. I'm going to look at Theoi's discussion. They said she was a fertility goddess of the Arcadian mystery cult of Acaxion, which, there's another. She was worshipped alongside her mother Demeter, sister Persephone, and Artemis. Her true name and function were only revealed to the initiates. Despoina was closely identified with Persephone, Artemis, and Hecate, all who bore the title Despoina. Okay, her parents, as we said, are Poseidon and Demeter. So let's look at what Pausanias has to say about Despoina. He says, when Demeter was wandering in search of her daughter Persephone, she was followed, it is said, by Poseidon, who lusted after her. So she turned, the story runs, into a mare and grazed with the mares of Onchios in Arcadia. Realizing that he was outwitted, Poseidon changed into a stallion and enjoyed Demeter. At first they say Demeter was angry at what happened, but later on she laid aside her wrath and wished to bathe in the Ladon. Demeter, they say, had by Poseidon a daughter, a Despoina, whose name they are not wont to divulge to the uninitiated, and a horse called Arion. And then another, these are all from Pausanias' description of Greece, okay, and you can find all of these on theoi.com. Phegalia, which is an Arcadian town, is surrounded by mountains. The second mountain, Mount Eleus, is some 30 stades away from Phegalia and has a cave sacred to Demeter surnamed Melena, which means the black. Okay, this is important. The Phegalians accept the account of the people of Thelpusa about the mating of Poseidon and Demeter, but they assert that Demeter gave birth not to a horse, not to Arion, but to Despoina, the mistress, as the Arcadians call her. Afterwards, they say, angry with Poseidon and grieved at the R-word of Persephone, she put on a black apparel and shut herself up in this cavern for a long time. But when all the fruits of the earth were perishing and the human race dying yet more through famine, no god, it seemed, knew where Demeter was in hiding until Pan, they say, visited Arcadia. Roaming from mountain to mountain as he hunted, he came at last to Mount Eleus and spied Demeter, the state she was in, and the clothes she wore. So Zeus learnt this from Pan and sent the Morai, or the Fates, to Demeter, who listened to the Morai and laid aside her wrath, moderating her grief as well. For these reasons, The Phegalians say they concluded that this cavern was sacred to Demeter and set up in it a wooden image. The image, they say, was made after this fashion. It was seated on a rock, like to a woman in all respects save the head. She had the head and hair of a horse, and there grew out of her head images of serpents and other beasts. Her tunic reached right to her feet. On one of her hands was a dolphin, on the other a dove. Now, why they had the image made after this fashion is plain to any intelligent man who is learned in traditions. Okay, so as I mentioned, there's so much right here. They say that they named her Melena Black because the goddess had black apparel. There's a grove of oaks around the cave, and a cold spring rises from the earth. Okay, lots and lots of imagery here. So let's go on with Pausanias. From Acaxion in Arcadia, or Acaxion, it is 4 stades to the sanctuary of Despoina. First in this place is a temple of Artemis Hegemone, which means leader, probably Hecate, with a bronze image holding torches, which I conjecture to be about 6 feet high. From this place there is an entrance to the sacred enclosure of Despoina. As you go to the temple, there is a portico on the right, with reliefs of white marble on the wall. On the first relief are wrought the Morai, or the Fates, and Zeus surnamed Moiragetes, the guide of fate, and on the second, Heracles wrestling a tripod from Apollon, or resting a tripod from Apollon. In the portico by Despoina, there is, between the reliefs I have mentioned, a tablet with descriptions of the mysteries, Talite, which of course, this is the writings of the mystery cult. On the third relief are nymphs and Panes, Panes being a type of a land god or household god. And the fourth is Polybios, the son of Lycortas. On the latter is also an inscription declaring that Greece would never have fallen at all, and it puts, for context, to the Roman Empire, if she had obeyed Polybius in everything, and when she met disaster, her only help came from him. In front of the temple is an altar to Demeter and another to Despoina, after which is one of the Great Mother, Meter Megale. Okay, so, all right, so we've got Demeter, we've got Despoina, and we've got the Great Mother, okay? This is important. The actual images of the goddesses, Despoina and Demeter, the throne on which they sit, along with the footstool under their feet, are all made out of one piece of stone. No part of the drapery and no part of the carvings about the throne is fastened to another stone by iron or cement, but the whole is from one block. This stone was not brought in by them, but they say in obedience to a dream they dug up the earth within the enclosure and so found it. The size of both images just about corresponds to the image of the mother, Meter, in Athens. These two are works of Damophon. Damophon is said to be a sculptor who was responsible for these, which, again, that's this is what Pausanias is saying. Whether it's true or not, we don't know. Demeter carries a torch in her right hand. Her other hand she has laid upon Despoina. Despoina has on her knees a staff and what is called the box. We'll talk about what those are in a minute, which she holds in her right hand. On both sides of the throne are images. By the side of Demeter stands Artemis, probably here identified with Hecate, again, that's a note, wrapped in the skin of a deer and carrying a quiver on her shoulders, while in one hand she holds a torch, the other 2 serpents. By her side, female dog of a breed suitable for hunting is lying down. By the image of Despoina stands Antaeus, represented as a man in armor. And he, of course, is a Titan who is said to have raised Despoina. Now, that's another thing, too. And we have to think about the fact that the Titans represent the kind of primal forces of nature here. Those about the sanctuary say that Despoina was brought up by Antaeus, who was one of the Titans, perhaps here the cohorts, as they are called. This is the same as the Corybantes, and I'm going to talk about who they are in a moment. This is the story of Antaeus told by the Arcadians, that Artemis was the daughter not of Leto, but of Demeter, which is the Egyptian account. The Greeks learned from Aeschylus, the son of Euphorion. The story of the cohorts, who are represented under the images, and that of the Corybantes, a different race from the cohorts. So he's making a distinction between the two, although frequently they're discussed together. Carved in relief upon the base, I know, but pass them by. The Arcadians bring into the sanctuary the fruit of all cultivated trees except the pomegranate. On the right, as you go out of the temple, there is a mirror fitted into the wall. If anyone looks in this mirror, he will see himself very dimly indeed, or not at all, but the actual images of the gods and the throne can be seen quite clearly. When you have gone up a little beside the temple of Despoina on the right, which is called the hall where the Arcadians celebrate mysteries and sacrifice to Despoina many victims in generous fashion. Every man of them sacrifices what he possesses, but he does not cut the throat of victims as is done in other sacrifices. Each man chops off a limb of the sacrifice, just that which happens to come to hand. Okay. Despoina the Arcadians worship more than any other god, declaring she is a daughter of Poseidon and Demeter. Despoina, which means mistress, is her surname among the many, just as they surnamed Demeter's daughter by Zeus Kore. But whereas the real name of Kore is Persephone, as Homer and Pamphos before him say in their poems, the real name of Despoina I am afraid to write to the uninitiated. Beyond what is called the hall is a grove sacred to Despoina and surrounded by a wall of stones, and within it are trees, including an olive and an evergreen oak. That's interesting, an evergreen oak, growing out of one root, and that not the result of a clever piece of gardening. Okay, so it seems like an evergreen and an oak are growing out of one root. Beyond the grove are altars of Poseidon Hippios, which is Poseidon as a horse, because we have to remember Poseidon, in addition to being god of the sea and earthquakes, is also the god of horses, as being the father of Despoina and of other gods as well. On the last of them, there's an inscription saying that is common to all the gods. Thence you will ascend by stairs to a sanctuary of Pan. Beside this Pan, a fire is kept burning, which is never allowed to go out. It is said that in days of old, this god also gave oracles. Here is an altar of Ares. There are two images of Aphrodite in a temple, one of white marble and the other older of wood. Okay, and then Apollo and Athena, and he goes on. And supposedly there's a sacred peak here where they say this is actually where Zeus was reared as a child. Okay, so remember Zeus was rescued from being swallowed by Kronos, his father, when Rhea gave him a stone to swallow instead of giving him the swaddled infant Zeus, and then Zeus was taken to Arcadia to be raised. And again, remember, Arcadia is supposed to be this place of origins as well. Okay, so we do see this also as a title of Artemis and Hecate, as it's mentioned, but this goddess that is referred to is not Artemis or Hecate, okay, even though there may be a connection there. Now, I was mentioning the Corybantes, so let me tell you something about them. They're the Chorites and the Dactyloi, or the dactyls. Okay, so I'm just going to read a little bit about them from Theoi as well for you. The Chorites, or dactyls, were 3, 5, or 9 rustic daemons appointed by Rhea to guard the infant god Zeus in a cave on Mount Ida in Crete. To keep the boy hidden from his cannibalistic father Kronos, they drowned out his cries with a frenzied dance of clashing spear and shield. The Chorites were gods of the wild mountainside, inventors of the rustic arts of metalworking, shepherding, hunting, and beekeeping. Okay, so these were the keepers of early technology. They were also among the first armored warriors and gods of the orgiastic war dance performed by the youths of Crete and Euboea. The 5 dactyloi, meaning fingers, were usually regarded as identical to the Chorites. These also had an equal number of sisters named Hecatirides, who together appeared to have represented all 10 fingers of the human hand. Dactyloi being the Greek word for fingers. The male and female dactyloi also were joined in marriage, perhaps imagined as a harmonious finger-to-finger folding of the hands, and from this union were born the rustic saturoi, the satyrs, the Oreads, and the Chorites. These younger Chorites were 100 in number. They married their sister Amelia, who are ash tree nymphs, and from their branches fashioned the first spears. The Chorites were closely identified with, if not the same as, a number of other rustic daemons, namely the Corybantes of the Euboean ones, the Samothracian ones, and the Cabroi, as well as Hoplodamos and his Gigantes, and the Chorite Antius, which is the one who supposedly raised Despoina. Yeah. So we have this idea. So we have a whole lot of imagery here that we need to look at, because this is the main story that we're dealing with. When we talk about Despoina, we see the context that she appears in, that she is this child of Demeter Erinyes with Poseidon, both of them taking the form of a horse, and that horse association, I think, is a very important one. It's also said in some other places that Despoina is associated to a certain degree with springs and with water as well. Like there's this association with wells. And we have this idea of her as being the mistress. Now, Carl Karenyi says at one point that he feels that this title, Mistress, may refer to the mistress of the labyrinth in Crete, because the name of, this title of Despoina and other associations with it seem to be not only in Mycenaean culture, but also in Minoan culture. And there's this idea of the mistress of the labyrinth at Knossos. Okay, Knossos being a very famous site in Crete, very famous royal site that had been excavated by Arthur Evans. And in that, we have this idea of the mistress of the labyrinth. And this is the labyrinth that has been associated with, whether correctly or not, with King Minos of Crete and the Minotaur, who is the result of Minos' wife mating with a beloved bull. And she was driven to do that because Minos had promised that Poseidon that he would sacrifice his best bull, and then decided he liked his best bull and said, nah, I'll sacrifice the second best one. So Poseidon gets back at him by making his wife lust after this bull, and Daedalus constructs some kind of an apparatus so that she can mate with it. And the Minotaur is the result of this mating. Okay, so we see Poseidon here being involved again. We definitely have these ideas of these animals. You have bulls, you have, and obviously with this with Despoina, this horse imagery as well. So I think the important elements that we are looking at here, we have the idea of springs and water. So we have this nature spirit association already, the idea of these nymphs of water. And as we know, Poseidon is also associated with the sea and water. Demeter is associated with agriculture. She's associated with things that grow. Because as we know in this particular myth, when in her grief over the loss of Persephone, she goes and hides in this cave, and that's when winter comes. Like, everything dies on the earth. So they're trying to find her and make her come out and bring things back again, and that's when there's this negotiation about Persephone being up in the world for a certain part of the year, and then for another part of the year she returns to Hades to be with her husband. This becomes a kind of winter-spring, among the many other meanings of this story, we have this definite winter-spring thing. Okay, and of course, water, sacred springs, sacred water, definitely associated very heavily with sacred Earth Mother sites and things like that. Okay, the horse. Now, I have a encyclopedia of symbol that I wanted to look up horse in that, and there's like 4 pages of stuff on horse. But I think the one in particular we're interested in, certainly there is the element of the horse being connected with the moon mother or the mother goddess and magic, because their horses, sometimes they were sacramentally eaten, sometimes it was taboo to eat them. They said that, there's this there is this whole idea of the sacrifice of the Sun King. Honestly, I'm not sure if any of that really, I think there's some controversy over whether or not that's a real thing or not. But, certainly we have goddesses like Rhiannon in the past, or maybe not in this podcast, but I know certainly in my book that'll be coming out next year, I do talk about the Morrigan element, Macha's race, chariot race, and Ulster seems to represent her as a mistreated horse goddess in its own way, and the story of St. Patrick and Macha, certainly Macha appears as a white horse. So there is definitely this connection to the land and to horses. Now, what they say here, under Earth, they say that the horse is associated with burial rites and Chtonic cults, represents the cyclical movement of the world of phenomena. The underworld, Persephone had white horses, they mention. Okay? And also there are connections of horses with water. The wave horses, the blind cosmic forces that surge out of primordial chaos, related to Poseidon. Poseidon created the horse, but he also hid among horses to avoid being eaten by Kronos. Identification of the god and his sacred animal, and this is also Pausanias. Rhea substituted a foal for him as a stone for Zeus, for Kronos to eat. He had stables with white horses for chariots, with brazen hoofs and a golden mane. He coupled with Demeter, who disguised herself as a mare in the form of a stallion. Sea covering the earth, he is the inventor of horse racing. The horse hoof-shaped moon is the origin of all water and rules the tides of the sea. Okay, so, and it's also worth noting, too, those of you who read tarot or follow tarot, that the chariot card is a card of Cancer, which is a water sign, because you might think, well, the chariot, which seems to have more of a Mars quality to it. It's more of that aggressive, forward-moving, taking control, fiery energy, but it's actually water, because the horses of the chariot have a lot to do with, and chariots and chariot racing are connected to this watery, chthonic kind of an element. Let's see what else we have here. In the myth of the isolated land of Arcadia, Poseidon appears as a beast, or horse, Poseidon Hippios, as we've mentioned, which represents the river spirit of the underworld. The conception was usual in Northern European folklore and not unusual in Greece. The horse, or Noumena, was related with the liquid element and with the underworld. The river god Achelous is represented as a bull. Poseidon mates with the mare Demeter, and from the union she bears Arion, the horse, and a daughter who originally had the shape of a mare too. So here, there's this idea that Despoina originally was in the shape of a horse. It seems that the Greek deities started as powers of nature, and they were given other attributes. These powers of nature developed into belief in nymphs and deities with human forms and the heads or tails of animals. Some of them, such as Pan and the Selenoi, survived into the classical age. The two great Arcadian goddesses, Demeter and Despoina, and they're saying later Persephone here, which, again, that's not, I don't think that's correct, were closely related to the springs and animals, especially to the goddess Artemis, the mistress of animals, Potnia Theron, who was the first, who in this way of thinking was the first nymph. Okay. They said, on a marble relief at Lascura is the Veil of Despoina, okay? Now, the Veil of Despoina is worth discussing here. This is a one image that we have. We don't actually have any statuary. I mean, Pausanias talks about this statue of Despoina, but the statue of Despoina is gone. There's no statue of Despoina, and the name is unknown of which goddess this actually is. However, there is an image still of her veil, which exists. This image of her is among images of Demeter, of Artemis, of Antylos. There's a whole bunch. There's a bunch of different images of heads, that are left over of the statues of these deities. But this particular image or carving of a veil is interesting. So I'm going to tell you what's on this carving. If you're watching this on YouTube, there's going to be an image of this veil among the images that I'm going to be circulating. Okay, so it says the veil of the upper level of the Veil of Despoina has the following modes of decoration: a series of triangular rays, a band of eagles and winged thunderbolts, a band of olive sprays, a frieze of the Nereids riding seahorses and Tritons with dolphins intermixed. Okay, the Nereids and the Tritons are all these are all sea deities. These are all elemental daemonic spirits of the sea and of the ocean. And a tasseled fringe. The lower and larger layer has from top to bottom a frieze of Nike carrying censers while bearing olive sprays in front of themselves. Okay, so Nike have to do with the little victory spirits, right? Pictures of Nike, a little winged spirit of victory. A band of olive sprays, a frieze of dancing animal-headed figures, and a running wave meander pattern. Okay, so this is what they have. It suggested that the veil is a representative of the types of tapestry or embroidered woven materials that were created by contemporary artists in that community. The high level of detail is cited as the hallmark of Damophon's technique. The frieze of marine deities and the running wave meander to Poseidon in the throne. The band of eagles and winged thunderbolts may be a reference to Zeus. So then they talk about what Pausanias says. Now, the other piece that... Okay, so let's get into this imagery from Pausanias, because we've talked a bit about the horses. Okay, we have these images. You have this wooden image of Demeter that Pausanias talks about, okay, in this cave. Now, the story of this cave is interesting because Demeter is wearing black, which is a chthonic color, okay? We associate it in the Western thinking with death, and it also tends to be associated with the north and with the Earth Mother in general. And that's also, we also see in this space that, the Pausanias describes that there's not only statuary of Demeter and Despoina, but also the Great Mother, okay, which is important here. And this is where Demeter hides, okay? So this is where Demeter goes into hiding, where she goes into death mourning, after she's given birth to Despoina, who is also associated with this. Now, this veil symbolism, I think I've noted here, well, I'm noting in my own notes here, that it has its relationship certainly to Isis. We think of the veil of Isis, but, the veil is certainly this symbol of mystery, of that which is hidden, of that which is not to be revealed. I remember I've spent a lot of time talking about the liminal and about the uncanny, and this is one of the element of that. It's when we talk about things that are occult or hidden or things that are uncanny, that we talked about the difference between the terms Heimlich and Unheimlich, and the fact that both of them refer to something in their own way that is concealed. And so this veil represents that concealing, okay? There's this concealment that's going on. There's a concealment of a mystery. So obviously, initiates of the mystery will probably have that revealed. Now, in connection to that, there is this, you see this statue of Despoina, who is wearing, she's got this box and she has a staff, according to Pausanias. In the rites of Eleusis, there was something called the kiste, or the basket, that was part of the rites, and also this staff or this scepter are definitely part of the Eleusian mysteries. So the fact that you see Despoina holding these definitely makes this connection to the rites of Eleusis. And the kiste, the basket, from what we don't really know what these mysteries were. From the friezes that we've seen that may detail aspects of these mysteries, or from the writings that may hint around certain rites and so forth, we know that this kiste or basket, there was something in the basket. There's some kind of a mystery. I'm trying to think. There's at least one frieze that, or one, I want to say, I feel like it was the Villa of the Mysteries in Pompeii. I feel like that's where it was seen. But that whatever's in this basket was something. This was a secret that the initiate was to behold. When you open this box, like Pausanias is calling it the box, but if you open this basket, this kiste, there is something in there that is part of this great mystery. So you have Despoina holding this box that holds this mystery, and then she's also holding this staff that are meant to that. Now, what I also noted was the type of sacrifice that is done in these mysteries, and rather than cutting the throat of a beast of whichever type was being sacrificed, they cut off a limb, which to me feels like a direct, symbolic reference to castration, okay? And the fact that you have these statues that are carved of a single stone, okay? Now, we have the wooden Demeter statue, and you have these interesting oak with the evergreen, so you have these mixed symbolisms of the trees and things that he talks about. But these statues carved from one stone supposedly by Demophon the idea of the one stone, I said the first thing I thought of as I was reading that was that the one stone is very likely a black stone. And the fact that stone was found in the cave and that they dug it up after a dream. So in other words, it's something, this is a magical stone and that it's here. And I'm going to bet that it's a black stone that these were carved from, that these images were carved from, this single block of stone. Because the black stone is very much associated with the Earth Mother and the Earth Mother Goddess. In fact, the name Kibale actually is said to mean black stone. I've mentioned this before in other podcasts, in Islam, okay, in the Kaaba, which is in Mecca, they have what do they have there? It's a big black stone that's supposed to be something has to do with Abraham and being placed there by Abraham, or where this original kind of sacred site was of Abraham. But there's a black stone there, and Kaaba also is a reference to a black stone. Now, of course, in Islam, they're not bringing they're Abrahamic religion, right? They're not bringing in this mother goddess reference. But the black stone is the most primordial, fundamental, sacred object or sacred thing, along with these springs and these sacred wells, connected to the Earth Mother. Okay, connected to this Magna Mater, or this meter. And the fact that Demeter is draped in black in this particular cave, this is really, really strongly Chtonic, and we're talking about the concealed mysteries of the Earth Mother in this place, which are very, very profound. And therefore, you would have to be an initiate to have that revealed to you, to have that name revealed to you. You can have the name of Kore or Persephone, because I feel like Kore as the young maiden or the girl, Persephone is a representation, well, not only of sort of death and rebirth, but also of just life itself in her own way, because the myth of Persephone is really a myth about coming into womanhood, really, fundamentally. She's the bloody rites of the Earth Mother, right? She ends up, these are similar to tales that you have of virgins being captured by dragons and things like that. There's this idea of the young virginal girl who is now capable of reproduction, because now she has that's the bloody initiation, right? You are now, once you start with that, now you are capable of reproduction. Now you participate potentially in that mystery of life. So you've got the Kore here, and she is, so this is Persephone. So when we see Persephone being swept away by Hades, swept away to the depths of the underworld to become the wife of Hades, and of course, as I've mentioned in the Persephone podcast, we see that story ends. It's not the way we always tend to view this as, oh, isn't this terrible? This poor young girl was carried away, and her poor mother had to try to find her. But as I've often pointed out, we're dealing with gods. We're not dealing with people. And to try to put a human social inflection on that, I think, would be a mistake. Although people do it. I mean, people try to identify with the story in that way. But it's not really about that. At the end of the story, it's been pointed out, and I've pointed this out in papers that I've written, and I'm not the only one to point it out. I want to say it was Myers who wrote in the Classical Quarterly. He was one of the articles I always point to that pointed this out, that the Greek, for when Demeter finally encounters Persephone, when she finds her in the underworld, when they are reunited with each other, Demeter says to her, well, you didn't eat any of the food of the underworld, did you? And of course, Hades she had presented her with the pomegranate, and she took and ate, depending, 6, 9, there's different numbers, but she takes and eats the pomegranate seeds. And once she does this, and of course he smiles when she does this, because this binds her to the underworld. Now, everybody likes to portray this as, oh, she was innocent, she didn't know she was doing. She knew what she was doing, because she knew that entire time that she couldn't eat the food of the underworld. Anytime she was offered food, she refused it. When she looks at her husband, and the pomegranate of all things, I mean, the pomegranate is not only a symbol of the really Chtonic fruit associated with the underworld, but it's also a very highly sexual fruit. It's, if you just look at it, I mean, it's got this very sexual connotation. It's used in, people who make love filters and things will use pomegranate. It's very much associated with love and love rights, as well as the underworld, which are very closely connected. Sexuality and so forth is definitely Chtonic in its nature. And so when she takes and eats these seeds, then she says to her mother, when her mother says that to her, she says, well, yeah, I ate these seeds, but my husband tricked me, and now I'm in love with him. It's something to the effect of that. It translates roughly to, now I am in love with my husband. So I've often looked at that piece, and again, who knows what it means, but there's also this certain motif of the young girl who goes into womanhood, and now she may turn in a direction, especially with regard to her sexuality, that may not meet with the approving eyes of her parents. And I think I talk about this in the podcast on the Hanging Virgins, as well as the Persephone podcast, which are ones I did probably like 4 years ago now. But they were some of the earliest ones I did. And yeah, the whole idea of because that was talking about Dionysus as the figure who was not approved of by the parents. And so the virgins who, in despair, hang themselves, or they take on the role of Ariadne or something who's abandoned. Actually, Dionysus marries Ariadne. But there's this kind of, these different roles that are played with regard to the dark stranger who represents this dark sexual Chtonic force, who takes the young maiden away. And of course, her parents are in despair about this, but this is part of the drama. This is part of what goes on. So she becomes queen of Hades at this point. She is the queen of the underworld because Hades is very, you almost can't separate. When we talk about Chtonios, which is the word that Chtonic comes from, right? It's not just a word. James Hillman would argue that it refers to what's under the earth and maybe not the earth itself. But I would suggest that it refers to both, because I don't think you can separate the two. The Chtonic realm is the realm of nature. It's the realm of nature spirits. It's the realm of the rustic. It's the realm of the wild. It's this Arcadian vision, and of course, this is this particular cave, and caves also, by the way, which are representations of the Earth Mother, the womb of the Earth Mother, the creation and destruction of things. In this particular cave, with this very strong black symbolism, and then also just the symbolism that she has. She has the dove and the dolphin. We see the dove frequently associated with goddesses like Ishtar, for example. Which later gets co-opted into the Paraclete or the Holy Spirit in Christianity. But yeah, you have these symbols of of love, of fertility, and then just also all that's sort of concealed by the Earth Mother. Everything that's both beautiful and terrible about the Earth Mother, right? And so this mystery, and if you think about the Eleusian mysteries, the one thing that we do seem to know about these mysteries, there were different levels of the Eleusian mysteries, and this was sort of the first religious way of thinking that kind of dealt with the idea of the immortality of the soul, for instance. Certainly, the Eleusian rites were about overcoming the fear of death. Okay, that one kind of almost undergoes a symbolic death to be reborn in some way, which is not necessarily that weird for like occult initiatory systems, because there's always some kind of ordeal that one passes through, and then one is transformed in some fashion after this ordeal. And so the ordeal there certainly is connected to this journey to the underworld, and then the at least temporary restoring of Persephone, or cyclical restoring of Persephone to the light. But she, so she comes to the light in the spring, and then she, for the winter months, now she is now down as Queen of Hades. And this connection with Artemis and Hecate, because we know that Hecate is the companion of Persephone who lights the way in the underworld. Hecate is shown with her torches, so she is the one who shows the way in the darkness. She's an unconcealer, right? She is the one who lights the way through what's occult or what's hidden, okay? Because occult is just, really the word occult, we always associate it with all kinds of things, but it literally is just the Latin word meaning what's obscured or what's hidden. And Despoina is also obscured and hidden because that's the type of goddess that she is. She is a Chthonic goddess. She has ties to Hecate, and thus she also has ties to Artemis, who is intimately tied also with the transition of young girls into womanhood. Again, I don't want to repeat everything I've done on previous podcasts on that, but but Artemis is Artemis is a goddess of chastity, right, and of virginity. When we see her mythologies, there's a lot of stories of the men who either view her while she's like men who they view her while she's naked, or the young girl who is dedicated to her, who is a virgin dedicated to her. In fact, we even hear of Persephone to a certain degree being dedicated to Artemis in the sense of being virginal, being chaste. And then somebody coming along and taking that virginity away. And in a lot of these cases, in that cases, or somebody seeing a naked Artemis by accident, like there's no R word involved here, right? That's not involved. It's more a case of, or there could be, but literally you've got these girls who are sort of virginal and innocent, and then they all of a sudden get swept up into this sexual activity, then they may become pregnant. And what Artemis does in all of these stories as a pattern is, she's vicious. She will usually turns them into animals, and then they are torn apart by hunters. There were a lot of rituals, because Artemis symbolically is the one who opposes young girls going into marriage, okay, and losing their virginity and becoming mothers and parents and wives and so forth. There may be some relationship there to the Roman belief with having to do with the Lares, or the household gods, where we see this idea of the bride being carried over the threshold. And that's a tradition that still exists, right? You pick up the bride and carry her across the threshold into the new house, and that was from a Roman tradition, because this idea was that if the young girl left the house voluntarily, they would be the Lares would be insulted. So similarly, in these rituals, Artemis would be insulted. So the groom would have to come and make it appear that the bride's being taken away by force. So there's this whole thing about, the families and offending the spirits or offending Artemis. So there almost has to be this trickery or this subterfuge around the girl leaving the household and, getting out from under the gaze of Artemis, or getting out from under the gaze of the household gods to be able to embark on her life with a new family and in a new place, and as a mother and not as a child, or, as a virgin or whatever. That's not a state that women are going to stay in, that, they're going to move on to this to this married state, or to the state of bearing children. So, and then, of course, as I mentioned in the podcast on the hanging virgins, then there's all the things that happen. And then on the Aori as well, what happens if they don't do that? So, yeah, a whole lot here tied up in fertility. So where does this leave us? Like, what does this tell us about this particular statue? So, all right, so you're in the place of the Curites and the Corybantes, right? You're in this. You're in this cave, you're in this space that's associated with Zeus and Zeus's rise to power, right? This pastoral first place, the progenitors, or the aboriginal Greek people, if you will, here in this place in Arcadia, which is associated with what is pastoral. In the hero myth, this is an area that is associated with where the hero's birth is. So it's a place that births heroes. It's very sacred. And in this place, you have not only this element of the Eleusian mysteries, but as I mentioned, there's also these Arcadian mysteries as well that are connected to it. And they might be the same, and they might overlap to some degree. One might even be informed by the other, although the Eleusian mysteries probably had a lot of other elements to them as well, potentially Egyptian elements and perhaps potentially Persian elements. Again, we don't know. We don't. We just know there's just things that have been hinted at, and the things that we know from those who did seem to be initiates. But yeah, you have all this symbolism, you have all this animal symbolism, you have this idea of sacrifice by hacking off a limb, you have this image of blackness, you've got the Great Mother there, the fundamental original Great Mother with Demeter, with Despoina, with Artemis being this mistress of the hunt or mistress of animals, and with this kind of way, with symbolism that shows that she sort of has this Hecate side to her as well. You have these very deeply Chthonic deities, and so and also these associations with Cybele, the Phrygian goddess Cybele, and this stone, or this black stone. Now, of course, Pausanias doesn't say it's a black stone, but it's a pretty safe bet that that's the kind of stone that these statues are made from, that the ones that are carved out of a single piece of stone, that's what they're carved from, because that black stone is the stone that you worship. That is the one that is that contains all of that Chthonic element of the Earth Mother. Okay, that is the Earth Mother embodied. So Despoina, and it's interesting because they say in the mysteries she's actually Demeter is second to her. And to me, that's also telling, because I'm like, no, this is some kind of name, whether it's one of the names we know or whether it's some other secret name that's referring to the Earth Mother herself, Earth Mother in her most veiled form, to the Chthonic in its most veiled form. So, yeah, again, strong connections to Hecate, to Artemis, and to the mysteries. And, of course, Poseidon being there, and also, this Anytus, who is a Titan, as I mentioned. These are all representations, and even Pan himself. I mean, Pan means all, and Pan has a little bit of the element of Baphomet. Not exactly the same. I don't want to say they're the same, but in the sense that you're dealing with a being that is an all. It's both animal and human in his characteristics. So he is a representation of fertility, of the all, and Pan. And just like the other satyrs, I mean, satyrs are also born, as we've seen, out of this group of sort of daemonic kind of group that is very closely connected to the Earth Mother, and indeed they are sort of the fundamental daemons or spirits of nature. So this has to do with the fundamental mysteries that underlie nature and the fundamental initiations connected to that. So Despoina, and I mentioned her in being connected to winter because obviously the birth of Despoina takes place when Demeter is about to go into this dark period where she's already angry. She's Demeter Erinyes because she's lost her daughter. So she takes on some of the characteristics of the mother's anger at the loss of the child, or a loss of her child to womanhood. Okay, she's no longer a child. So there's this initiation, this sort of underworld initiation into this new bloody Earth Mother space. And in this space, when Demeter's in there wearing black and in mourning, what happens when she goes and hides in this cave? The world around her dies. So this is the time of winter. So Despoina is very much connected. The birth of Despoina is actually connected to winter. So in a certain sense, she represents that mystery what I think a lot of people like who practice modern paganism would talk about as being almost like crone imagery. Because remember, she's mistress, she's not chore. Okay, so she's not, that's what I think about the difference between that. I said, okay, she's not young girl, she is mistress. So this is a much more developed energy than that of Persephone, who, Persephone, of course, comes into her own right as queen of Hades, but she is, her mythology is that of the young girl becoming a woman. So Despoina represents some mystery that's much deeper and much more potentially terrible to people, or something that is not to be revealed to the uninitiated, as we've said, because it represents a deeper mystery that probably has to do not only with life, but probably life's connection to death as well. And that is something that probably the average person doesn't deal in. Just bring up this subject anywhere and just see how comfortable it makes people. And I've talked about that. I talk about that in the introduction to my book as well, Death and the Maiden. But it's very. It's not a comfortable, this is an aspect of things that's not comfortable for people, is not necessarily understood. People tend to understand it in good or bad, black and white terms, in the sense of, oh, well, life is good and death is bad. You have to really be able to get beyond that to see what is behind these mysteries and what is behind this kind of workings of nature, in which life feeds on itself. Life feeds on life. That was one thing. I remember Campbell had said this, and I've repeated this a number of times in different places too, but he talks about the story of Kirtimukha with Shiva, the monster that he creates to eat this demon that's coming to take his wife away. And then when the demon throws himself on Shiva's mercy, Shiva, of course, who will switch on a dime, says, oh, okay, he won't eat you now. And the demon's like, well, you created me to eat him, so now what am I going to eat? And Shiva says, well, eat yourself. And so the monster starts with its feet and then just devours itself, and there's nothing but the shining face left, which Shiva puts at the top of his temple because he marvels at it, because that's that representation of the mystery of life. Life and death are, life feeds on life. It's a terrible, sublime kind of a mystery that you can't necessarily approach with ethics and with the rational mind. So I feel Despoina is very likely a reference to this very type of mystery, which is why her name will always be obscured. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy these podcasts and you're new to them, please consider subscribing. I'm on Spreaker, on whatever podcast app you follow, on YouTube, my Chthonia channel on YouTube. All my work is listed on chthonia.net, which is my main website. If you want to follow me on Patreon, because I do extra material, and you do get early access to episodes and some other perks on patreon.com/Chthonia. And you can follow me on social media, Chthonia Podcast, one word, on X and X and Instagram. Instagram being where I am most of the time. And 2 words, Chthonia Podcast on Facebook, just Chthonia on YouTube, although it is also now at Chthonia Podcast, one word. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a great start to your 2024, and we'll see you in the next episode.